So, welcome to the April. It's April 1st. This really jumped on me, I must say, yesterday when we were transferring from March 31st to April 1st. I was like, oh my God, Journal Club is tomorrow. I've never done it this early in the month. So, I really thank Sally for adjusting her schedule to be able to join us. And really excited today about this topic because this was a paper. Once again, I'm doing papers from the Research in Medical Education supplement that comes out in November from AAMC. And this is a paper that was published on a very, very important topic about, 3 versus 4 years of medical school. So I'm really excited. And I'm excited to have Sally Santen here because she's a longtime colleague and friend of mine from circles that we travel in, but I must say Harvard Macy Institute for sure, and is an author on this article, of course. And then Julia Caton is here because she led our curious questioning team discussing this topic. So Samara Ginsberg, who of course is very engaged in this topic as well, felt it was really important that we have a voice here from what we've been thinking about. We have no decisions made or anything, but just how you think about this topic and what is the long-term implication, which is what I love about this paper because it's carrying it out to what we're preparing all our students to do is become interns. That's what we do. And looking at the implications of a major decision of a whole year of medical school is really an important to look at the next step being, of course, internship. So I'm going to have Sally introduce herself. She's been in a few institutions, and I thought maybe it would just be easier if she introduced where she is now in her current role.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure we have that correct. And then she'll share her slide deck. So thank you. And I hope there'll be some engagement. There's a question coming up in the very first slide. So I hope we'll get some participation.
Okay, sounds good. So I am Sally Santen. I am an associate dean of educational research and innovation at the University of Cincinnati. And as Alice has said, I've been kind of around multiple institutions. Most of this work is actually coming from when I was at Virginia Commonwealth. Okay, I'm emergency medicine by training. Okay, so I am going to share slides. Hopefully this is going to work. Perfect. All right.
There it is.
I think you can see it. I will not be able to see questions. And so I think when I get to the question slide, I'll pop out. But does we look okay? Slides look
Right.
good?
And I am going to put you as a spotlight. Let me do that. As a pin, I'm sorry.
Sounds good. All right. So this is coming out of a Stemler grant, and this is our author. Oh, actually, no, wait, this is not the Stemler grant. This one is coming out of the CAMP consortium, and which is the Consortium of Accelerated Medical Programs. This is our CAMP group, and so these are some of the schools or the schools that are involved in this study. There are more schools who have actually started to do 3-year curriculums, but this is the group for this study. It was partially funded by the AMA because 2 of the schools have reimagining residency grants, and then University of Cincinnati gets paid for my work for the AMA, and the CAMP consortium was initially funded by Macy grant. So those are our disclosures. Our learning objectives. I think we want to consider the outcomes of 3-year versus 4-year medical school graduates. What does it mean if you graduate in 3 years? What does it not mean? And then also just in terms of methodology, since this is a journal club, to think about the use of milestones for aspects of outcome research, because people tend to like to use milestones, or some people don't, but there's some idiosyncrasies and thoughts about milestones that we'll get out of this. Okay, let's just start with the first question. How useful is the 4th year? I'm going to stop sharing and let you all jump in. How useful is your 4th year? How useful is your 4th year? How useful are your students?
Thinking as a physician, if you're a physician, you had 4th year of medical school, I think, and people involved in our 4th year could make some comments, or anybody who's involved off-site, that we might have some off-site people here based on my invitation.
So the question is, how useful is the 4th year?
It's a little unfair to ask us because we probably have a more robust 4th year than most medical schools.
Okay.
We have our students doing 3 acting internships. They're typically all, connected and related to the field and specialty that they're, interested in. So we like to think that it's somewhat useful and preparatory for them.
Okay. And so, what I'm hearing is that the utility for your students is really kind of pre-professional to the specialty that they're going into.
Yes.
Okay. And if you had an accelerated curriculum, you could actually kind of fit those at the end of the third year if you had accelerated everything down, perhaps. Just saying.
Also, we have scholarly concentrations, which
Right.
are on the rise. And in the fourth year, they have to do a capstone project. No matter what scholarly concentration you're in, you need a capstone. And it doesn't have to be a project for publication, but it can be.
Yeah.
But it is a project related to the scholarly concentration. And it seems that only fourth year has the time for that type of project unless we, made
Yeah.
blocks of time elsewhere.
And so that one is important for kind of pre-professional and identity in some ways for skill building. And then also in the current, conundrum of applying to medical school and Canary, the shadow economy. I don't know if you all have seen that paper of the shadow economy, but it's
Yes.
like, what do grades mean and how do you actually use them, or what do you use in order to get into residency? Ben Kinnear and Eric Worm called it the shadow economy and wrote a paper that just came out on that. So that there are things within the fourth year that are probably very important in terms of application for residency, because a scholarship or a scholarly program will then allow you to hopefully get into residency or the one of your choice. Other thoughts or any other?
It also,
Julia, do you have a thought? Oh, I'm
Might-
sorry. Were you, Lou?
It might be the same that Lou was going to say, so I'll let him go first.
well, I was just going to say, actually, it allows for the facilitation of applying to residency. And so I think just logistically, when I was at NYU, when they started the 3-year pathway, those were guaranteed residency spots that, and so they didn't have to engage in that part of the process.
Yep.
So that is not necessarily an educational thing, but it is a sort of a professional transition that occurs during that time.
Yeah, I think all of these are good things. And I think the reason I asked the question is I think it depends, right? It depends on the student as to how useful it is. We have a project that we're working on that's looking at the rigor of the fourth year across 7 schools. And there is one school where like they do 12 weeks of something clinical and that's all they have to do. And the students are doing about 12 weeks. That's it. They're not doing anything else. And so we're basically looking at like how many weeks of clinical, how many weeks of IAI, how many weeks of ICU, just this, and then how much of that comes after January, so that you're actually like, are you off and done nothing clinical for 12 months? And it's just fascinating between the schools and the students how different it is. Okay, I'm going to go back to slide set because we've talked about kind of the fourth year and how we might keep it or not keep it. All right. So, so essentially, I mean, our role in medical school is to provide a graduate who is ready for patient care and ready for training. The problem is that there's this gap, right? There's all this stuff in UME, and then there's a gap, and then there's GME. And in fact, often there's no kind of information transfer across, except in the form of like MSPE, which we don't think is particularly honest necessarily in terms of the transcript, which is kind of hard because the grades are all different. And so there's really not a good information coming across from UME to GME, and there's almost very little information that's going back from GME to UME. And so what we're trying to look at here is the data across the transition. This can inform the trainee, it can inform the medical school, and it can also inform the training program. If we have some sense of, what's the performance in medical school in relationship to what the performance in residency is. And so this study is kind of central to understanding GME. We're hoping that by understanding some of these questions, we may understand like training resources, educational designs, better preparation for medical school, and really kind of program evaluation. And so the data that currently exists for medical schools are these 3 things in terms of how do we know about the transition? I think the first one is the AAMC Resident Readiness Survey. And so they survey all the program directors now across the country and then give that information identified back to the medical school. The GQ questionnaire doesn't really do much across the transition, but tries to do a little bit about preparation. And then the ACGME Med School portal, which is interesting because I was talking to my friend at the ACGME this week, and he's like, nobody's using it. So you can actually get all of the information, it's in aggregate on your graduates so that you can see how they're doing in terms of their residency milestones. That's kind of the information that we have across. I'm going to shift here and just talk a little bit about the three-year consortium. So basically there's the consortium of accelerated pathway programs. It's where students complete medical school in 3 years. There's one school that it's 3 years and 2 months, which makes it a little bit wonky. And it allows for an individualized education pathway into specific specialties. The majority of the schools are a directed, it's NRMP. We have to do really careful language because if anybody's in the GME world, it's a really touchy space because of this antitrust and dot, 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 dot. But they are called directed pathways. And so the majority of the programs have directed pathways to residency programs. And so the residencies are often part of the selection into the pathway. And then we'll make kind of decisions along the way. So for example, the program that I started at Virginia Commonwealth, we called it a coalition of the willing. It was the program directors who were willing to join with us. And they actually interviewed all of the students and decided whether or not they were okay for the specialty and into their specialty. And so the majority of these programs are truly a directed pathway, meaning you start medical school and from day one, you may have your residency, or from end of year one, or from end of year two, you have your residency. There are 3 of the schools which are not, which are the 2 NYU schools, and then the Wisconsin schools are not directed pathways. The other programs, people can choose to go outside of the directed pathway and go someplace else if they choose to. What's the purpose behind these 3-year programs? I think the first one is for us, at least at VCU, is to decrease debt. So that you can significantly take a year off of the debt. It probably decreases some stress along the way. Many of the programs are related to workforce, so they're family medicine or internal medicine, trying to get people into the workforce. And then we did it at VCU. I just wanted to see if we could do it, right? To challenge the structure and efficiency of traditional 4-year pathways. The general structure is as follows. The first year is generally the same, or the preclinical phase will be the same. Students will often, in order to get the 130 weeks, will spend some time right between year 1 and year 2 doing something that is related and counts for curriculum. The NYU schools, if you're aware of them, they are 1 + 1 + X is what I call those. And so theirs is an accelerated preclinical, then a full clinical, and then there's X, which is where you put things in. Many of the schools don't have that structure. And so VCU was the bottom structure, which was year 1. We did not do anything in the summer space, and then year 2, and then we put a month into right before the 3rd year, and then 4. But you can see how you're just kind of able to squish everything in and still get some of the 4th year things. It mostly does it by kind of decreasing unstructured space. So there may not be electives. There may be something in the spring. Often there is a directed, like you're spending time with your directed pathway. So if you're doing family medicine, you will likely spend your 1st and 2nd year work and your 3rd year clinical in your family medicine residency program. And so it's creating a nice kind of transition into residency. There's the QR code here, you can scan it if you want, but there's a increasing amount of papers and related to these 3-year pathways, of which this was one of them. But there's been an increasing number of 3-year pathways. We've looked at return on investment. And so there's a paper about why should you do this and who does it help? There's a paper on burnout that used the GQ and found that essentially the burnout was the same. There's a paper about kind of the learning environment, that's Schuling's as well. I think there's another paper about attrition from 3-year programs, like how many people transition back into the full program. There's about 20 or 30%. And then most recent one, which we're waiting for a review, is what the cost is, what the net present value is. And so the savings to the student is it's actually like 290,000, depending on which specialty you're going into. So these are all things that are related to the 3-year program. So that's kind of our background for this study. So specifically our research question is, does the length of medical school relate to residency performance? And it was done as a non-inferiority study, meaning that we're not trying to say that they're better. We're just trying to say they're the same, that it's not inferior. Method-wise, we have the sample was graduates from 21 and 22 from 16 schools. It was a total of 182 learners from 3-year programs. They were matched to the graduates of the same schools. So the same 16 schools with 4-year graduates, that was our comparison sample. We looked at the largest specialties, emergency medicine, family medicine, dot, 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 dot. And you can see here kind of our sampling strategy was for medical school 1. So let's just say that's Virginia Commonwealth. We looked at our 3-year graduates, and then we looked at all of the 4-year graduates as well. And that was done for each school. So basically it was the control was matched to the other schools in the cohort, but not specifically to the school itself. And so and then all of the graduates were nested in their residency program. And that's an important point if you're doing milestone work. Okay. The things that we're looking at specifically are the specialty milestones. So I don't know how many of you are in the GME space, but the ACGME has these 6 milestones: medical knowledge, patient care, and those are different for every specialty. And then with milestone 2.0, they started identifying harmonized milestones. And so there was a bunch of work groups that were put together, and they decided that here's the milestones for each of the specialties that are the same. And so the harmonized milestones across all specialties are relatively similar. So systems-based practice, practice-based learning and improvement, professionalism, and then communication. And so that was our outcome that we're looking at. The analysis was non-inferiority, comparing as we talked about. We looked at harmonized milestones across the multiple specialties, and then we looked at internal and family medicine separately because we had an adequate sample to be able to do that. The specific methodology is this cross-classified random effects, and that takes into account that residencies do not score people equally. And so it takes into account the residency program idiosyncrasies, and we did a power calculation to assure adequate sample size because it is non-inferiority. Okay, any questions on the methods? I kind of ran through it pretty quickly, but any methods questions?
Yeah, anybody have any questions on the method, since this is probably a new methodology to many of us to really understand?
And don't ask me really tough questions because I don't do that. Like, I understand it vaguely, but I don't. But anyway.
Any thoughts on this?
Just say that to me, one of the challenges it seems is that the students in the comparison group might not be exactly the same as the students in the accelerated program group because they're specifically selected to be in that program. So I was wondering if there was any information about other characteristics of the students between groups.
Got it. And so I'm gonna restate, and you could take it from different couple lenses. I agree. I think that students that are chosen for 3-year programs are probably different than those who choose 4-year programs. Does that make sense? So Virginia at VCU, our system was different. Ours was a competency based, and we actually bumped people out if they weren't excellent. Like if they were just all passes, we didn't think they had the honor to graduate early, and we bumped them out. That's not what most of the programs are doing. But I think when you do these programs, and I don't know if everybody does this, but you got to be a little bit careful, because if you fail step 1, you're like, it's messed up. If you fail step 2, you're really messed up, right? Because step 2 for some of the programs, it actually comes after match. And so if you have gone through the whole thing, you're in a 3-year program and you fail step 2, you're in trouble, or the program is going to be in trouble. And so I do believe that many of the programs are selecting students with slightly higher MCATs, probably a little bit higher academic performance in that way. I also think that we've seen this kind of hint of step 2 scores being lower, because you don't have to apply for residency, you're already in, right? And you may not have to study it, like the grades aren't going to be as much. You might not study for shelf, right? Dot, dot, dot. So I think they are different, and they're different in their process, and they're different in their experiences. And so I think you're right. They're not the same. Other thoughts?
I guess my question would be, the data I've seen on milestones is that there's a significant portion of people that just sort of go down the line kind of checking. And so does the cross sampling and that occurs more frequently in certain specialties. And so does that cross sampling account for that, or were those people, I've seen studies where those people are thrown out. So
Got it. So it's called straight lining, and you're right. There are some specialties, like I think there's, I forget which ones, but some of them, like up to 20% of the students are straight lined, or the residents are straight lined. And the other thing that we see is there is more straight lining in the first year because you don't know them well, right? So you're like, they're doing fine. I'm going to straight line right down a 1 all the way down. And so straight lining is an issue, and it is certainly a limitation. The sample, the population is nested in their residency program. And so if it is a residency program that tends to straight line, that will actually correct for itself in terms of they're compared to their cohort. Does that make sense? Yep. But very good point. And that's one of the, as we were talking about, one of the issues with milestones is this thing of straight lining. Cool.
Could you
Mhm.
have any more detail on that non-inferiority concept? Because
Yeah.
I had
So
never heard
so I
that
think
at all. And not that I'm a major researcher, but I have to say, I've never read a paper that had that statement of a non-inferiority.
got it.
Go ahead.
The non-inferiority stuff comes out of like epidemiology and clinical medicine, right? I'm trying to prove that my Pepcid is as good as your Tagamet or whatever, I'm trying, right? I'm trying to prove that my amoxicillin is as good as your
Augmented.
And so that's where it's coming from.
see.
The key thing with, and so what you're actually looking for, let's see, there are two pieces with this. One is you're looking for there not to be a statistical difference.
Uh-huh.
Because that says non-inferior, right? It is the same.
Right.
There's no statistical
Wow.
difference. The key with that, and this is that when you're looking at these studies, when you see something that's not, where there is no statistical difference, is you have to have an adequate sample to be able to determine that. Like if we take 3 students and 3 students and we say, oh, they're the the power to detect a difference. And so the sample size calculation is really important when you're doing a non-inferiority study.
See.
I can also talk a little bit about this, Alice, because
Sure.
we did publish an article once including this. I learned a lot about it. So basically, I think people think the idea, if you do like a statistical comparison and the 2 groups are not significantly different, that automatically means that they're not inferior, and that's not really true. You're just showing that they're not different.
Right.
The non-inferiority study, basically, it requires the experimental group to be within the confidence interval of the control group. So you're really showing mathematically that they are similar. So that is the main difference. If you just show that 2 groups are not significantly different, they could be completely like separate means and standard deviations, but the non-inferiority piece, you just have to be like it. And I think in the paper, it even, you have to designate the confidence interval ahead of time. That's another important thing. You can't just do it after the fact. So you have to set it beforehand. And then I think they chose like a 0.5 point difference was the interval that they were choosing, as it has to be like a 0.5 point difference in order for it to be considered non-inferior. It couldn't be more than that.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. I guess it is. The term is correct for what it is, because
Weird term. Yeah, it is.
I understand the term. I just never used it in a research paradigm, honestly. So that's what was new to me. Any other questions about the methods and this, the way they went out to the residencies? Anybody, I know Lou, you're involved in fellowship more, but anybody involved in GME thinking about this? Let me look at my list of participants. Pull on a GME person if I know somebody here. Yeah, we don't have a lot of GME people here, that I know.
I'll keep going.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, so that's methods. Okay, so here's our results. So with the harmonized milestones, and we use EM, FM, IM, PED, Psych, and surgery. My friend in OB said, what happened to OB? OB actually didn't have milestone 2.0, which is why we did not have OB. They actually had not, they're a late entry into milestone 2.0. So that's why there is no OB. So what you're seeing here, these are box and whiskers. So the straight line across is the mean. This is the standard deviation, and then and then showing outliners. And so essentially what you're looking at is you're looking at the big line across and saying, are they essentially the same? So if I'm looking at that first one of communication ICS, you can see that the 4-year graduate mean is approximately the same as the 3-year graduate mean. And if you go across each of these, you can see that essentially you're seeing similar means across the 3-year and 4-year graduates. In aggregate, you can see the means at the bottom, so that the 3-year graduates were 1.95 and the 4-year graduates was 1.83. And then and that first box of ones is at 6 months, which is when the milestones are first reported, and then at the end of year when the milestones are reported. So essentially we're seeing similar milestones.
Wait, go back one. Can you explain on the 3-year graduate at the end of PGY1 under PBL?
Mhm.
I don't see a line in there, or am I not reading this correctly?
The line is at the bottom.
So it's at the bottom, right? Well, that's what I was thinking. So right, so that's interesting.
Yep. Hang on a second.
Okay.
Yeah, it's at the bottom. So it means that they were all kind of above that, which means that it was relatively high, that the mean is 2, but it's still relatively high.
Let me see.
Okay. So then this is so in the milestone 2.0, there's an option you can score people, and then there are 2 other options. One is not assessed, and the other one is not yet ready for supervised practice. And so the not yet ready, we've actually been doing quite a bit of work in this space, because it's basically the program director saying they were not ready for residency, and so that's an issue. And so you can see here, this is the not yet ready for any subcompetency within the harmonized milestones. And what you can see is that the 3-year graduates actually had a lower, where are we? 3-year graduates had a slightly higher not yet ready than did the 4-year graduates at 6 months, and then it kind of is normalizing for 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then this is the internal medicine ones. Again, the same box and whisker plots, where you can see that the mean here is 2.6 versus a 2.04, but essentially they're similar across, and the same thing at the end of year.
But in the ICS,
Mhm.
the 3-year graduate, it looks a little bit like they're higher across a little bit.
There may be some, like, if you look at, there may be little stuff along the way.
Right, not significant, but little.
Yeah, little stuff. And better or worse, it's hard to know, I think. Then this is internal medicine, and here you're actually seeing that of the not yet achieved level 1, the 3-year graduates were actually less than the 4-year graduates in terms of the frequency with which we're seeing that. And that one is just barely significant at 0.03, and that's really the only significant finding along here. When you look at family medicine, again, seeing similar blocks and whiskers with similar means across. And then within significant differences, it is not statistically significant, but you're again seeing a little bit fewer with the 3-year graduates as not being ready for supervised practice. All right. I'm just going to kind of do a brief discussion. So basically, as we've mentioned previously, this students may be different because there is self-selection and institutional selection of the pathway. There are reasons that we think that they may be better. One, there's a home field advantage. They're staying with their own system. 2, they're actually known by the residency program people. So they were like selected, known, spent 4 years with them. And so it's possible that they will actually be better, but due to structural things rather than truly training. And then we also think there's not that 4th year where you're going to take time off. So you will not have like 6 months off before you go directly into residency. It is of note that there may be some COVID effect in this population, because this was 21 and 22 graduates. So in general, there's no differences in the harmonized milestones, and no real differences in internal medicine or family medicine. And there's maybe a difference in not achieving level 1, but probably not. And again, this was the non-inferiority, so we're looking to have no significant difference. All right, I think that's what I've got.
So what do people think about the results?
I feel like this is kind of brought up already, but maybe I'll just say it a little bit more explicitly because sometimes when we've looked at the milestone data, even just to see like, do our graduates look different, from others? It seems to me like I'm not sure that there's like actually enough variation, if that's the right word, within that data to even be able to like detect any difference around any question. I mean, I know this was a specific question, but I guess, yeah, what are your thoughts about that? Or maybe that's not true. Maybe other people have queried, milestones and found differences.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you let's see, that's a multi-pronged question. When you go back to what Lewis said that with the straight lining there are issues, and that the milestones are a really blunt instrument. Like they're not showing a lot of stuff because there's not a lot of variability. Programs use them differently. There's a lot of kind of issues with it. Accepted. So with our STEMler group, we're actually looking at 7 schools and the relationship to their milestone outcomes. And interestingly, like we're looking at OSCEs across 4 schools, like how people did on their OSCEs. And there's a signal. Like if you did better on your OSCE, you did better in residency, which is really interesting. And then we're also looking at like step 1 and step 2 to see whether or not that's going to do something. And there's a little bit of a signal. There's actually quite a bit more signal in terms of this not yet achieved. So I think they're getting scored not yet achieved. So I think there is enough signal to see stuff, but it's blunt, right? It's not a very discriminating instrument, but I think there is enough to see stuff.
Right. Was there any qualitative data collected at all with this project?
No, it's a national data set. So essentially
Right.
it's the ACGME did the work.
Right. What do you think has that been done in other papers? I know you're very familiar with this literature more than me. Julia, did you find qualitative data when you did your work?
Nothing that comes to mind. There is the paper that I know you all reference in your study that has to do with like the learning environment and burnout, which is not qualitative data, but it's another dimension of this question.
Yeah. And it was interesting with the GQ, they did not, like they actually had worked for the AAMC and used the GQ for burnout and not burnout. Interestingly, we've got a study happening with the Board of Family Medicine. And that one's actually showing some different stuff is that we may be seeing a little bit of burnout for interns when they start residency and then not further out. But that first thing in the very beginning, there may be a little bit of burnout, which is not surprising, right? If you go direct, like if you finish all of your clinical rotations in May and then you start residency in July, you could see how there may be some issues there. But qualitative, no, there's not. The group has been talking about professional identity formation, but they have not moved that into a study at this point.
I'm just wondering, like, and Lou, maybe you have some idea because you're so engaged with students. Like, would the students have a qualitative, like, data on, I know they haven't done this in our program, but in general, what it's like to do a medical school in 3 years versus 4 years? Any way you think that would be very worthwhile, like, really doing some interview data during internship year for the differences and getting that, sort of that richness of the interview data.
Yeah. I think that would probably yield pretty rich data, actually. And I think that, but I think it's a complex enough experience, and the differences are going to be pretty complicated. And so I think, having that richness of data through qualitative analysis would be pretty reasonable. I like the idea of I'd never really thought about it before, of like one of the functions of 4th year is actually, a period of diastole to prevent burnout in the intern year. Like that's somewhat fascinating to think about. The other thing, like I think the home court advantage, or the home court advantage, is quite strong not only are you familiar with the people in the hospital and the EMR and all of the whole nine yards, but you're also familiar with the city. You don't uproot yourself and your family. And I think when I think back to the people that I've had most problems with in my residency program, it really almost always is fundamentally some kind of seismic shift in their life that creates it rather than an incapacity to actually perform their job. In terms of like a deficit of medical knowledge or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know, how would you methodologically, it seems like most schools are doing that direct pathway. So it's just like methodologically, how would you try to dissect that out?
Sorry, what are you trying to dissect?
No, like to account for that like home field advantage, like
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not move. You're talking about like not just up. It's so interesting because I was just speaking to a resident in internal medicine like 30, an hour ago, and she wants to apply in endocrine. And I said, well, you better apply broadly because your colleague who's in the same program in her and graduating this year did not get endocrine. I said, I think the advice is he applied too limited, okay? And her immediate answer was to me, Lou, well, I really don't want to leave New York, just like that. I don't want to uproot myself. Everybody's here. And I said, this is a 2 years of your life. And if you really want to do endocrine, so I think it does mean something to people to keep, be medical school, residency, fellowship, the number of moves, and the people who have maybe more resilience who can handle all those transitions personally, maybe, able to do things that other people can't. So, but it's not I just want to clarify something. It's not a requirement for a 3-year medical school to have an automatic entry into residency, right? I'm getting confused.
No, there's not. Some of the programs have it and some of them don't, is the
Right.
answer. So Hackensack, they can go, I think they can go anywhere.
They can go anywhere, but like at NYU, Long Island, they go to Winthrop or whatever.
Yeah.
So not Winthrop, the
And
NYU.
actually, the NYUs they're open now. They can go anywhere. I think from a school point of view or from an institutional point of view, like when I tried to pitch this to my vice provost, she actually was interested in decreasing debt, but we kept our best students, right? And so for emergency medicine, we often found that the best students went someplace else. And so emergency medicine became part of the coalition of the willing because they got to keep their best students. And so it keeps the best students. And then most places are then recruiting them for faculty. And so if you're trying to like pitch this of why should we do this, the reason to do it is because you decrease your debt. That helps with your LCME. You get to keep the best students, maybe not. And third, you then have an automatic recruitment into faculty positions. And so you're missing, you're not going to spend $100,000 trying to recruit somebody. And so you end up with this kind of commitment to people where they are.
When NYU started and they were directly linked to the residency, all of the people we took for a 3-year pathway, I think all of them became chief.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so it really was that kind of proof of concept of you kept the strongest people. I think a bunch of them are now on faculty at NYU.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and I think like some of that also though, because they hit the ground running and they're so good initially, some of that is a little bit of probably halo too in terms of.
Yeah, I agree.
Time-wise, any other questions, comments? I know we have other people on here besides Zucker School of Medicine. Haley, you're a guest. Any comments? Kelly, I know you're a very involved program manager, so I wondered what you're thinking about this idea of them coming in 1 year earlier. Anybody? Ruby's a program manager. Thank you. These are people who really engage deeply with residents.
I actually, when you said you use milestones, my stomach kind of sunk a little because I know, like we've all been saying, I don't know. I don't know if they're really good data in terms of a lot of things. I think especially I was thinking in my brain, like 3 years versus 4 years, you really grow in that fourth year. And so I was curious to see how they did on the professionalism score for the milestones. But I was thinking, I feel like that, Alice, would be a good quality piece, would be to see kind of really get the information from whether it be the program directors, the faculty, really get those kind of narrative comments to see how they really are performing.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Before I let Leanne go, we'll bring a slide back for a minute. I just want to say, I think this will be an ongoing question. I mentioned earlier before we started in a casual conversation that I have two children that are attendings now, and I think both of them really benefited from their fourth year of medical school as individuals. They did a traditional college medical school, no gap year, which I know a lot of students do. And I think they needed that fourth year of medical school. Yes, it cost a lot of money. Believe me, I can attest to the amount of money it cost, very upfront. But I do think it added to their education. Now I'm speaking for them, not with them. And I know Cooper, where Marcy went, was part of your study. I saw it in the list. I also want to say that every medical student, I say this all the time to people, every resident, every medical school is a person. They're not the same. A lot of people say medical students and everybody's the same, residents and everybody's the same. Each person is an individual. So I love Sally's idea or concept that the 3 year is okay, but then there is this fourth year that could be configured for the person. Now, all this individualization and personalization does take effort, but I think as educators, nothing happens without effort and in individualization. I've been an educator, now in different venues for over 40 years, and I feel a lot of the work I've done with students is individualized. So I'm going to put a plug in for that before we any final thoughts? We're going to sort of go to the final slides, but any final thoughts on this?
I think Elizabeth has her hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. I couldn't see that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think this is tremendous important information, and also coming from a European background where the medical school curricula are longer. I think at this point we see less burnout in longer curricula, and I haven't looked at the data, but there is a trend that in longer curricula there is more consolidation, that there might be less burnout. And also new schools invest a lot of efforts into student wellness, reducing student burnout. So it might make a difference about, how fast there is, and it might make a difference, of course, with how much depth you go on, right? But I wonder if it really also serves the student, if it is a longer curriculum, for their personal wellness, in order to kind of, make the moves, moving on through their life, and just also having the time to consolidate the knowledge during the time.
Right. And I just want to mention, it's bringing up a point with Elizabeth speaking, because she was with Zucker School of Medicine and is currently at a new Caribbean medical school, a new medical school in the Caribbean, I should say. It's a better way to say it. And it's just interesting, could the medical students from the Caribbean really need fourth year for a lot of show and tell? And, this process, yes, it would reduce a lot of money because of the cost of medical school in the Caribbean, but in the sense, would they really be at all at an advantage if they only had 3 years of medical school in that setup? And I would like to say offshore schools, not just in the Caribbean, all the offshore schools, because there are many, many offshore schools around the world.
And yeah. And I think we've got another one we've worked on, which looks at international medical grads, international Caribbean DO, MD, right? And the frequency of their milestone stuff. So I think you do see differences depending on the specialty.
And I think that's going to even change for USMDs, because in the shadow economy of effort, away rotations is now factoring pretty heavily in specialties where they weren't factored before. And so I think that also changes the dynamic in terms of a fourth year of medical school and having the opportunity to do those things too.
Speaking of which, maybe you should invite the shadow economy guys to come talk to you. Ben and Eric are good friends of mine, and Ben, I think, would love to come do it. So
both of them, I think, have been at Northwell fairly recently in person with John Young. So we'll have to invite them back. And the shadow economy, I didn't see that paper. Where was that published, by the way?
Academic medicine.
What?
Academic medicine. I'll forward it.
Great paper. We've been talking about it like a lot.
It's like in my it's like burnt into my
brain.
Lou,
could you forward it to me?
Yeah, I'll forward it.
I'll get them to do a journal club on it.
Yep.
People don't say no to me. It's interesting. People like talking about their research, I guess. Okay, so I'm gonna bring the slide deck back up just for a minute.
Yep.
And did you have one more slide, Sally?
No, it's just a question. I think that was it. Let's see. Is it
Okay.
showing? Seconds. Yeah. That's your bibliometric.
Okay. Go back to the bibliometric 1 minute. You want to speak to this, Leanna?
Sure. So I'm Leanna Sager. I'm the scholarly publications librarian for both the School of Medicine and Northwell Health. I'm going to talk a little bit about bibliometrics from this month's article, and these metrics are all from the Scopus database. So far, since its publication in November, this article has been cited 6 times and has a field-weighted citation impact value of 4.94. So that number shows how well a document is being cited compared to other documents, similar documents of a similar age. And any value above 1 means it's being cited more than expected. So this is being cited much more than expected so far.
Oh, feel
It's
good,
also,
Sally.
yeah.
I didn't. I was
It's
like
also-
only 6. I was bummed, but that's all right.
No, I mean, it's a pretty new article. November hasn't been very long. Even though it feels that way. It's also been saved 4 times via the Mendeley Citation Manager, which indicates that the user intends to go back and read or reread the article and potentially use it in their own research. And finally, following our journal club trend this year, it's featured in the prestigious Rhyme issue of Academic Medicine.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks.
And next slide. So everybody, maybe we could put this Survey Monkey, Leanna, usually put that in the chat for me. It would be great. Any feedback? We're getting on to our last month of Journal Club. I take June, July, and August off, and I'm really excited. It's another Rhyme article. And this is really interesting because Northwell Health, I don't know the number, but it's definitely near 1,000, I think, has between physician assistant and nurse practitioners a tremendous ACP, advanced clinical providers or advanced provider clinicians presence at Northwell. So I picked this article specifically because of the culture of Northwell having a true respect. And this is looking at the impact of this group of people on resident education. So this should be of real interest to the GME community. And any last comments or thoughts from anyone? I really want to thank Sally for coming today and sharing her, of course, expertise, knowledge, passion, love of medical education for sure. She's one of those people that I think eats, lives, and sleeps this stuff. So really an honor to have her here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for reminding me.
And oh, thank you, the Shadow Economy article. Thank you. And that's it for today. Everybody have a great April. I won't see you till May, but have a great April and enjoy the spring.
Good. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.